All right, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today we're going to be doing the tier list for Vancouver Regionals. Vancouver Regionals is, of course, this weekend. I'm going to be in attendance, and of course, the meta has shaken up quite a bit since EUIC. We did see some decks kind of pop out and do really well this past weekend, and I'm going to be ranking all the decks in the format and maybe some decks that might be going up the tier list in terms of how well positioned they are for this tournament. And of course, I'll leave a link to the tier list down below. Let me know what you think of my tier list opinions down below in the comments. Let me know in the comments also if you're going to be going to Vancouver this weekend. I hope to see some of y'all there. It's my first time actually being on the West Coast, so I'm pretty excited for that. And I haven't been to Vancouver before, obviously, so really excited to visit it. And if y'all are new here to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 22K subs, I think. Yeah. Anyways, let's get into the video. We got S, A, B, C, D tier for the tier list, and let's get into it. So, in my opinion, the best deck right now is Dragapult. I'll throw it in S tier. I don't think it's like an S tier deck, like a true S tier deck, kind of like how we saw Drago or Lugia be S tier decks, but it's definitely the BDIF right now. Like, I think no one's going to make the argument that Dragapult is not the best deck in the format. It's probably going to be the most played deck at Vancouver. I would expect this deck to still be in that like 18-20% range of play. There are a few different variations of the build. There's actually a couple variations of the Dragapult Budu deck itself. We've seen two versions of it. We saw Natalie's build in the finals, and then we also saw the Vini and Tord build with like Monkey Dory and Unfair Stamp and Halucha. So there's two kind of different ways to play it. I mean, if we combine the two together, you know, they're two different variants of the deck. I think the more popular one will still be the Budu Dustnor build that Natalie played, because it's probably the most like straightforward of the Dragapult decks that she played, and I think that obviously that one will probably have the most play rate, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a little bit more of the Tord build, Tord Vini, Gabriel Fernandez build, still a bit more play. But yeah, Dragapult's obviously S tier going in the tournament. It's probably the one deck that doesn't have any flat-out auto losses, or at least its worst matchup is probably still not going to be as bad as you might think. So we got Dragapult Iron Thorns, the other Dragapult variant. I would probably put in C tier. Again, it's just kind of a worse version of Dragapult Dustnor. It does have a better matchup into stuff like Goldengo and also Lugia, which, I mean, to be fair, those two decks are looking pretty good for this tournament. Or at the very least, Goldengo is going to maybe be a little bit more popular than it's been before, just because it had such a breakthrough performance at EUIC. And, I mean, the deck's not terrible either into Cloth if you start Thorns, or, I mean, assuming you also run a Clef Key in the deck. So, Thorns, I mean, C tier maybe is a little bit too low. Honestly, you know what? I'll bump it up to B tier. I don't usually root for this deck at the moment. I still think it's a mediocre deck overall, but I think that you actually are taking better matchups right now into decks that might be a bit more popular this weekend, which is actually what makes the deck a little bit better than other decks right now. I don't think it'd be high in the B tier. I'm sure we'll bump it down a few ranks in the B tier. But, I mean, honestly, going into this tournament, it's not the worst time to play a deck like this, to be honest. You can play the Toadscruel again in your Dragapult Iron Thorns deck to help your matchup versus Goldengo, because that deck has a decent chance to be slightly more popular than it's ever been. And yeah, like I said, if you start Thorns or if you play the Clef Key or whatever against Cloth, pretty effective, right? Because Dragapult usually crushes Cloth if it gets to set up, and if you can slow them down for a couple turns, you get to set up your Dragapult fairly easily. The problem with the deck is I don't think it really beats the normal Dragapult variant with Dustnor, and I also don't know if it's good into Gardevoir. Next up is Dragapult Charizard. I guess I'll throw it in B tier too. Again, it's just like, I feel like if you're gonna play Dragapult, just play the Dustnor version. However, I will say there is a better reason to play the Thorns build, just because it does help offset kind of that awkward matchup into Goldengo and Cloth, which is actually a reason to play Dragapult Iron Thorns over Dragapult Charizard. Dragapult Charizard is fine, but I think if I were to play a Dragapult deck this weekend that wasn't the Budu Dustnor build, I would probably just rather play Dragathorns, because the Iron Thorns is giving you a better matchup into some of the more popular decks right now. Gardevoir, probably A tier. Gardevoir is probably like the second best deck right now, maybe. The deck is much like Dragapult. It has a lot of good matchups. The one benefit of playing Guardy right now is we might see some more Cloth going into the tournament, right? Cloth won a UIC. A lot more people are going to be attracted to it. Gardevoir has a good Cloth matchup, so I would probably put Guardian A tier. The problem with Gardevoir, though, it doesn't have a good matchup against Dragapult. That's the main issue the deck faces, though it's maybe a bit better into the build that Vini and Torteron, but I don't know. Like, Guardy definitely has a bit of a sus matchup against Dragapult, but I think it's definitely an A-tier deck. I'm sure we'll see a decent amount of Guardy. I'm expecting also some of the top players this weekend to play Gardevoir. I think, because, like, we saw at EYC, that wasn't the case. Not as many top players were playing Gardevoir. Even the Gardevoir king himself, Henry Chow, played Goldengo. I don't think that's going to happen again. I don't think Henry Chow's going to play Goldengo this tournament. I think he will probably look back at playing Gardevoir. So, yeah, Gardevoir is still A-tier. To be honest, going into Vancouver, like, just beat Gardevoir and Dragapult, and you're probably going to have a decent run at the very least. All right, next up is Gouging Fire. I mean, I don't know. Like, is C-tier a little bit too mean for the deck? I haven't put enough time into the deck yet to, like, really gauge how good it is. Actually, you know what? I'll say B tier. To be fair, it does actually have an okay matchup into Dragapult and Goldengo, which are actually going to be a little bit, Goldengo's popularity might go up a bit. I don't know if you're good in a Cloth. I don't think your Guardy matchup is good. That's one of the downsides about Gouging Fire. It doesn't have the best matchup versus Gardevoir, but you're okay into Dragapult. You're pretty good into Goldengo, I guess. Miraidon should be favored. I don't know, like, it's just really, is the Cloth matchup good? Is the Miraidon matchup really all that good? Is Archaladon beatable? Stuff like that. Is Lost Box a good matchup? I would probably just place it in B tier for now. Yeah, probably like middle of B tier is where I'd place Gouging Fire. It's an okay deck. Like, it doesn't seem terrible. The one reason to play it is because there's going to be more Goldengo maybe, so that's not bad. Next up is Quad Thorns. I'll put that in like C tier. It's like a pretty mediocre overall deck. Even if we do see a little bit more Lugia this weekend, which I expect might happen, I don't think the deck is worth playing. If I'm going to play a Thorns deck, honestly, just play Dragapult Iron Thorns, because then you have a better matchup against Cloth, and that's pretty good. And Goldengo even. So I would probably just put Quad Thorns in C tier. Honestly, you know what? I might even place it in D tier. To be honest, I don't think this deck is worth playing right now. The more I think about it, the more I don't like it. Like, yeah, okay, like your Lugia matchup is really good, but, like, Lugia's not even the most popular deck anymore. Lugia fell off hard after Merida, and I still expect Lugia's play rate to not be as high as it could have been. Like, I mean, we'll rank Lugia very shortly, obviously, but I just don't think Quad Thorns is a good deck right now. I don't know. Like, if you're playing this deck, you're probably not going to make day 2, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, you'll probably see 1 or 2 make their way into day 2, because it is one of those cheesy decks that sometimes can do that. But I just don't think the deck is very good. Like, also, I think Gardevoir is going to play Klefki again just because of Cloth's popularity. If they're playing Klefki and Flutter, it's pretty bad. Yeah, I don't know. Quad Thorns D tier. I don't know. I think this deck sucks. Like, just play Dragapult Iron Thorns. You want to play an Iron Thorns deck, in my humble opinion. Miraidon, I'll play that in B tier. The problem with Miraidon right now is that it has a really bad matchup against Cloth and Goldengo, which are 2 decks that might be a little bit better for this tournament. So I think Miraidon's got to stay in B tier for now. Unfortunately, the deck definitely has fallen off since its kind of pop-off. Like, going into EUIC, the deck was like maybe A tier, but I think bumping it down to B tier seems fine. The one thing I will say about playing this deck, though, is, like I said, there's still going to be a lot of Dragapult, and there's still going to be a lot of Gardevoir. Those are still 2 decks Miraidon is good against. I mean, Dragapult, if they're playing the Blood Moon now in the deck, it's a little bit scarier, but I do think Miraidon is a decent pick for B tier. It's probably still the best turbo deck you can play for this tournament, because it has a good matchup into both Guardy, and Dragapult can be winnable. So that's good. Like, you're taking a matchup into 2 of the big decks right now, which is important. So Miraidon I would still put in the B tier for sure. Next up is Cloth. I'll throw Cloth in B tier. I mean, A tier could be respectable, but ultimately the deck is probably going to be a little bit more respected this weekend. Cloth definitely feels like a one-time tournament type deck where, like, its EUIC run was really good because it was good for EUIC because there was so much Goldengo being played, and, people were still high on the Miraidon train, and it just, nobody was really respecting the deck, and that's why it won EUIC. It was a good deck for that tournament, but Vancouver, I think Cloth, Terapagos, Budu, whatever you call it, is now probably a little worse just because it's kind of been figured out, or at least people now know about the deck, and its popularity will probably increase a little bit. Even though I don't think it's really the best deck for the tournament, its popularity will be a little higher than before just because it won UIC. People are attracted to the idea of donking the opponent, right, with Pekarant, which is a big deal. So B tier is like a decent place for it. It's definitely a decent deck, but again, I think stuff like Dragapult's popularity, Gardevoir's popularity are going to be pretty scary. If I'm playing Cloth for this tournament, I'm either hoping to dodge Gardevoir, or I'm hoping that Gardevoir and Dragapult players get donked. Other than that, I mean, the deck is kind of iffy. Like, if Gardevoir and Dragapult get a set up against the Budew, Cloth, Tropicos deck, it's GG's. It's pretty tough for Cloth to really formulate a plot, in my opinion. It's still an okay deck, though. Don't get me wrong. I think B tier is a good place to put it, for sure. Lugia kind of feels like A tier right now. I think mainly because I don't think Miraidon is as well positioned for the tournament. So the weird thing with Lugia, though, is I actually think that Lugia is... the thing with Lugia is, like, I think Miraidon will still be fairly popular in Vancouver because it's Miraidon. It's, still, at the end of the day, people like Miraidon. People are going to play it, even if I think the deck is a little bit worse for this tournament, for sure. I think Miraidon, ever since Merida, it's going to keep getting worse and worse in this meta in terms of, like, placement. So that means Lugia doesn't seem like a bad pick, right? If you don't expect a lot of Miraidon, then Lugia isn't a bad play. If you're somebody who wants to play Lugia to a tournament like this is probably a decent time because I think Miraidon is going to be a little less relevant than it's been before. I still think, unfortunately, Miraidon will still be fairly popular, but if you can win the first couple rounds, you can probably make it far into the tournament because I think at that point you might not see as many Miraidon. To me, Miraidon will probably do worse this tournament, though I think it'll still be a little popular. Also, Lugia is just like, it feels like nobody's really looking at the deck right now. Nobody's teching for it or anything. Lugia also has a decent matchup versus Cloth. You also beat Guardian Dragapult if you get a set up. So I would definitely put Lugia in A tier for now. Like, it does feel like Lugia is finally starting to go up. The issue I have with Lugia, though, is, or not really the issue, but the thing with Lugia is that I don't think it's going to be as popular still. Like, I don't think it's going to be as popular as it could be. Like, theoretically, the top 3 most played decks will still probably be Guardy, Dragapult, and Miraidon, and then maybe Archaludon somewhere in the middle there. But Lugia will probably still be in that, like, top 6, 7 range of played decks, but it's a little bit more well-positioned for this tournament than it was before. I'll say that. Next up is Control. I don't play a whole lot of Control. I'm, like, B tier, I guess. Snorlax, I'll also throw in B tier. Damn, a lot of decks in B tier right now. It just feels like there's a lot of decks right now that are just very decent, but not, like, anything insane, which is why we're probably seeing the B tier get so, like, filled up. But I think both Snorlax and Control are fine. I don't play these decks. I do think Snorlax is still the better deck than Control. Overall, it's a bit easier to play, in my opinion. So I think, it's still going to be the more common deck, right? Like, literally at EUIC, everyone in my friend group who played the Goldango deck hit a Snorlax deck. So, like, the deck is still fairly common overall, even though it's not heavily played. It's still the more common of the stally Control decks. Also, I think there will still be somewhat of a Snorlax presence in Vancouver. Not a lot, but keep in mind, it did do good in EUIC. It got, like, 2 of the top 8 spots. But Snorlax doesn't seem to have a good matchup versus Dragapult. Guardy is close. Lugia is atrocious. If Lugia is going to be a bit more popular, I would maybe say avoid Snorlax, but again, we'll have to see where that places. So B tier is, like, fine. Lost Box. We got another B tier. Oh my god. Dude, the B tier is getting filled up. Now, I actually think Lost Box, going into UIC, I think I called it an A tier deck. Lost Box is really good for UIC. Like, I think it was a great play for the tournament. But I think now that we are going to see a little bit more Cloth, it's not a great matchup for Lost Box. Also, the Dragapult Unfair Stamp deck is also not very good for Lost Box. If that deck becomes more relevant, I don't think it's a great matchup. I think Lost Box, I'd have to put in B tier for now. It's still a pretty insane deck, don't get me wrong. It really depends on, like, what the Guardy lists look like, too. Like, if Gardevoir's flaying, like, Klefki and Flutter, it's pretty bad. Lugia's not a bad matchup. So, like, one good thing about playing Lost Box is your Lugia matchup's solid. Miraidon, I don't think is very great. Usually Miraidon amps you, and it's pretty hard to beat them. Cloth is also, like, kind of a bad matchup because they can just knock you out with Budew. They can kill your Comfeys with Budew, which is actually really scary. So that's a big deal. Like, Lost Box feels like it was a better play for UIC, but post-UIC, now that Cloth is on the map now, I think that's a bad matchup for the deck. So I think B tier is, like, a fine place to put Lost Box. It's just kind of, like, it gets a bit worse because of what Dragapult's been playing, and then also because of, like, potentially Gardevoir's techs and then Cloth's popularity. Lost Tina, I'll throw in C tier. It's, like, a worse Lost Box deck. Sablezard, probably D or C tier. I still like this deck a lot. It's a very underrated deck, but it's probably worse than just playing Turbo Pikachu Lost Box. Next up are the Palkia builds. Noctowl Palkia, I'll put in D tier. I think it's just, we're not going to see that deck have a decent performance again because of Budew. Like, Budew just kind of, in my opinion, killed off this archetype at the very least. Because, like, if the most popular deck in the format is playing Budew, the one that's going to be the most played in Vancouver, it's just not it. Palkia Dusknoir is a little bit of a better deck, though. I'll throw it in C tier. I still am not sold on the deck yet, but Palkia Dusknoir is fine. It's probably the best way to play Palkia. Budew's kind of funny in the deck. I think it's a decent deck, just nothing too crazy. Next up is Ancient Box, C tier. I do like Ancient Box a lot, and I still think that it was not the worst deck for EUIC. I think that it's actually got some decent matchups. I don't think your Cloth matchup is terrible. I don't think your Guardy matchup is bad. Your Dragapult matchup is fine too if you play the Monkey Dory and stuff. Um, you're just like an overall like pretty solid deck, but you don't really take any like good matchups. That's the issue. I think your best matchup overall is probably Lost Box, but that's not even a really popular deck. And if you play Pekron, technically your best matchup is Snorlax. But again, that's not a popular deck. So Ancient Box is kind of in the C tier where it's like theoretically it's good against a lot of these decks, but like in practice it's a little bricky. It doesn't really have any good matchups, technically speaking, and none of them are really worth playing. It's just middle of the road C tier. Next up is Shenpao. I'll put that in D tier. I actually am working on different Shenpao decks right now. Actually, probably, well, actually not really, but sometime later this week there will be a video on Shenpao. I was going to say when this goes up, there'll be a video on Shenpao. This video is going up literally in like on Tuesday, which there will not be a Shenpao video on Tuesday. So yeah, Shenpao, I am working on making another Shenpao video to make it work in the Badu format, but overall, we haven't seen Shenpao do well at all this format. Obviously D tier. Charizard is also D tier. Yeah, I mean, the meta is just not great for it. I would say Cloth Badu is a good matchup. It's not. Badu obviously destroys Charizard. Charizard has been seeing a little bit more technology, though. Like, we've been seeing TM Evo in the deck. Max Bell's a good ace spec. The Monkey Dory that was played this weekend is pretty cool. Like, it's definitely not a bad deck, but, like, it does feel like Charizard, it's just really hard to play a deck right now when, like, two big decks are going to be playing Badu this weekend. Again, your Snorlax matchup's never been very good. The best part about playing Charizard is that your Miraidon matchup and your Guardy matchup are decent, especially because I don't think Guardy's playing Devo anymore. But then again, you have an awkward matchup into Lugia now that they have Regigigas, and if Lugia, I think, will go back to double Cinccino this weekend, that's also pretty bad for Charizard. I think overall Charizard is just like, it's just not the time to play the deck. Even though there are ways to play it, I mean, there's so many bad matchups, man. Like the Guardy, like the Cloth, Badu, Lugia, Lost Box, Snorlax, Control. Just, I don't know, it just feels like the deck is just not in a good spot. Raging Bolt. I mean, I did hype this deck up, and I still actually really like Raging Bolt right now. I think the best part about playing Raging Bolt is it beats Dragapult. I literally think out of every single deck on this tier list, I think Raging Bolt has by far the best matchup against Dragapult. It destroys Dragapult. The problem is, you're not really beating too much else. Your matchup into Miraidon is decent, but then your Guardy matchup's never been good. Lugia's never been good. I don't think your Cloth, Badu, Tropicos matchup is great either. There's just Raging Bolt is too linear of a deck for it to really be able to answer some of these other decks. The one advantage of the deck, though, like I said, not only does it body Dragapult, like it absolutely crushes Dragapult, but then you just take all these awkward matchups as you're a little bit too linear. But again, some of the benefits can be is that Raging Bolt is the type of deck to punish your opponent for having a bad start. Like if they brick, or like if Lugia technically is a bad matchup, but if Lugia doesn't set up fast enough, Raging Bolt can usually take the prize lead and win. So it's like there are still advantages, but yeah, it's fine. I was putting C tier literally just because it's a good deck against Dragapult. Regidrago is weird. I'm still going to put that in C tier. I mean, it's definitely not a bad deck. It's still a very powerful deck in a vacuum. The problem is Badu exists. I don't know if your matchup versus Dragapult is great, and also also Lugia and Tropicos are getting popular. I don't think those are great matchups either for the deck, because once again, Badu is a bit of an issue for Regidrago, and also Lugia has never been a good matchup. Also, our Chaladon is another matchup that's not ideal, so I would probably put Drago in C tier for now. I just personally wouldn't play it. I think it's a really cool deck right now, but it just feels like you have to get a little lucky for the deck to have a deep run. Goldengo. Honestly, A and B feel good. I'll put it in B tier for now. I feel like it's like Miraidon. It had that breakout performance at EUIC. Once again, much like Cloth, it was a good deck for that tournament. Post EUIC, it does feel a little bit worse. It's not great that Cloth is going to be a little bit more popular this weekend. I do expect Cloth and Goldengo to maybe be around the same play rate, though. But yeah, I mean, if Cloth's going to be a bit more popular, that's like a terrible matchup for the deck. By fight, it's your worst matchup, other than Snorlax, because you can't beat Cornerstone Ogrepon. But yeah, I mean, Goldengo's like B tier, pretty good deck. It beats Dragapult. It's not bad in a Guardy, and yeah. Miraidon's not bad either. Lugia's close. If they play double Cinccino, it's probably a little bad. And I expect Lugia to play double Cinccino this weekend. I think Goldengo's a pretty solid B tier pick for my opinion. Roaring Moon, Turbo Moon's like, I guess I'll put it in C tier. I actually have seen a little bit of hype for this deck as of lately. I just don't think it's like the best deck ever. Like, okay, it's fine. I don't know if you're really beating Dragapult though, which is kind of the issue. I'll put it in D tier. I'm gonna be honest with you. The more I think about the deck, the more I'm like, nah. If I'm gonna play a turbo deck, I'd rather just play Miraidon or Gouging Fire. Sarah Ledge, funny deck. B or C is like okay. The problem is this deck hasn't been having any good performances, but it has been doing good at I've seen a lot of people post on Twitter that they're winning cups and challenges with the deck, but then they go to these big tournaments and the deck has no placements. It's like I don't know where to put it. I guess high C tier, top of C tier. I guess I'd call it a B tier deck, but it's not doing good enough for it to be any higher. It's not a terrible deck though, but one issue is if Lugia is going to be a little bit popular this weekend in Vancouver, Lugia's your worst matchup by far. They have Gigas and Cinccino. Good luck. Dragapult's a great matchup, but Guardy's close. Miraidon's fine, I guess. I don't know. The deck's okay. C tier is probably a good place to put it. It's a fine deck. It's probably neutral against Goldango and Cloth. Control, Snorlax, probably good matchups. Lost Box, unfavored. It's a fine deck. I don't know. I'll put it in C tier for now. Next up is Archaladon, which is definitely B tier. I just don't think there's any other deck in A tier other than just Lugia and Gardevoir. And even then, I'm not even sure Lugia deserves to be in the A tier. But Archaladon is still a pretty good, fine deck. It's fine. It's the best way to describe Archaladon. It's the best kind of fine. You know what I mean? It did get top 4 in EUIC. I think the Dialga build might be the way people play it. Bridge is pretty good into Dragapult, I guess, and Miraidon's fine if they don't play Zapdos. Even then, they get to work for it. I would assume Archaladon's good into Budew Terapagos. That deck's going to be a bit more popular. Also, your Lugia matchup isn't terrible either, except if they're playing double Cinccino. So, I don't know. Yeah, Archaladon B tier is, I think the best place to put it, for sure. I'd probably place Archaladon in the B tier. Yeah, B tier. I'd probably sandwich it between Goldango and Miraidon. And then finally is Terapagos Dusknoir. Once again, I think it's just a D tier deck. Dragapult is not a good matchup, and also it doesn't really seem like it's going to have a good time into Goldango or Budew, which are two decks that have a good performance at EYC, and we'll probably still see some play in Vancouver. So if you're somebody who's been playing the deck, I'd be a little scared of those decks specifically, but yeah, D tier. I think every deck in D tier is they're good theoretically speaking, except for Iron Thorns, but there's just not the right time to play them, if that makes any sense. But yeah, that's my updated tier list for Vancouver. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my meta predictions video. But like I said, I still think Dragapult is BDIF. Guardy, Lugia, probably A tier. Lugia's debatably B tier. Debatably, Lugia's in B tier. There's a lot of decks in B tier. Every deck in B tier is a decent deck that's not bad into Dragapult and Guardy, but just has all these weird inconsistencies about them that just kind of hurt them. Or they just kind of have this polarizing matchup spread overall. I think this is a fine tier list. I don't know, Lugia in A tier does feel a little bit high, but it does feel like Lugia is primed to have a bit of a comeback. The problem is, like I said, I still think Miraidon will be popular, even though I don't think Miraidon is the best deck for this tournament anymore. But we'll have to see on that one. I'll do more of my meta predictions later on in a meta predictions video. But hope you enjoyed the video here on the second channel, doing my tier list for Vancouver Regionals. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of it. And did I miss out any decks? I don't really think I did. I think I got the gist of most of the decks right now in the meta. But like I said, I'll be in Vancouver. Cannot wait to go and visit it and explore Vancouver a little bit. I'm excited and hope you all enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed, leave a like. If you're new to the channel, subscribe down below and all that good stuff. And I'll catch you all later. Bye-bye.